are struggling to keep their place or are struggling to keep some of the old powers in check. We believe it's very interesting times, and we believe the world order as we knew it after World War II is possibly coming to an end, is maybe shifting into a new mode, is maybe finding new ways forward. The classical success model that we're all used to, namely capitalism combined with democracy, is possibly reaching its limit. It was a highly successful model in this part of the world. And I think as we speak, everyone or most of the people here still subscribe to it. However, there are signs of trouble. See that the democratic process leads to very populistic leaderships, to short-term thinking, to electioneering, to using of, let's call it, bad news or fake news or whatever you want to call it to get elected. And populism is on the rise. Silly decisions are on the rise. And amongst one of the silly decisions, I would see Brexit, just to give you an example. I would see the rise of populism in some of the democratic regimes, let's say Hungary and Poland. You see populism arising in very normal countries like the Netherlands. You see it in Germany, AfD. It's all over. It could be just something that is passing, but it could be something that is a sign of shifts that are taking place that are more momentous than what you would think. We tried to find 4 paradoxes. So we will organize 2 panels this morning. We tried to isolate 4 paradoxical pairs, and along these 4 paradoxical pairs, we would like to engage you in a discussion of how the world could be, where it could go, and what it could mean for our future. And frankly speaking, it's a very wide open topic. We do not want to tell you where the world is going. We do not want to tell you this is where it must go. We are just trying to tell you we are currently on shifting grounds, and we should think about where the world should go to. And this, as you can imagine, is very much a topic between superpowers and blocs aligned with superpowers. And as you know, the Belt Road Initiative is an initiative of one of the superpowers that is touching many others along its way. The Belt Road Initiative brings ideas and concepts of maybe a neglected superpower into the vision and into the eyesight of many of the countries where it goes through. One of the countries, for example, Pakistan, I'm sure they have a lot to say about it. Other countries like Switzerland, we do not yet have to say a lot about it because we have not been touched, but we see what's going on. This is why I think it is a very important topic for us in Switzerland. We believe, and now I try to make the bridge into the organizations that are organizing this panel. We believe that Switzerland could play a very important role in being a stage for discussions like today's discussions to take place. We have a relatively neutral stand, or we have traditionally a very neutral stand, but of course we are part of Europe. Europe typically is influenced by the old Western powers. Nevertheless, I believe Switzerland is capable of giving neutral ground, having a neutral position, allowing for a academic neutral discussion to take place. Of course, the Belt Road Initiative is a projection of influence. It is also a projection of power. But possibly, it is just a projection of influence and power that will forthwith balance powers and influence that come from the other superpower. And as I'm saying, the world is shifting, and the rules and the order are shifting. Maybe it's time to give your head, once in your quiet moment, when you don't have to answer emails or WhatsApps, it gives you the peace of mind to think about where the world is going and where you want it to go and where you should educate your children where it should go. And talking about children, my latest experience that I just had when I discussed with our 9-year-old about how she should be self-motivated to shape her own future and become a good student. She kind of looked at me and said, "Is there a future?" And I couldn't help looking at her and said, "What are you talking about?" And then she says, "Everyone is saying there will be a third world war." I said, I couldn't believe it. So in the next day, I discussed with one of my friends, what does your daughter say with regard to another world war? His answer was, all these kids are talking about the Third World War. Somewhere in the blogosphere for children, there is some talk about a world war happening. When I see that, I get really worried. And then I get to the point where I think a discussion, as we should have it today, as we discuss about who thinks how about one of these major shifts and how should we maybe think about these shifts, is very crucial. With this introduction, I want to slowly head over the topic to our panelists today. I will introduce them shortly from my side, from my right, which is your left, to your right. And they will all contribute some ideas about where they see the world to go and what they think about it. The topics that this panel will deal with are the paradoxical pair of sustainability versus exploitation, and the paradoxical pair of equality versus nationalism. The first panelist that we hear today is Henry Lee. He's managing partner of Hendale Group, a true international citizen of this world. I think born in mainland China, moved to another part of China, then raised in the US, and now living in Hong Kong, married to a Chinese Swiss. Is that correct?
Parts of it, yes.
Part of it. Henry is managing partner of a private equity fund, so he knows and sees what's happening in China, and he knows and sees what's interesting to invest in. And it could be that anything that you must invest in are just big polluters, for example, but it could also be that they are not big polluters and that they have changed their ways. Next to Henry is Fabian Gull. He's a journalist and a China media executive, lived for a while in China, one of the hidden Swiss jewels. Mainly, he looks Swiss, but he knows how Asians function, and he knows how to deal with Asians. He has researched quite a bit in his lifetime. He will have a lot to say on any topic. Next to Fabian is Yun Cheng, chairwoman of Fosun Fashion Group. Fosun Fashion Group owns brands like Lanvin, Woodford. She is managing all of those, chairwoman of all these groups. A lady that knows the numbers, a lady that had to learn how to come from China and deal with these silly Europeans. And a lady that has her problems carved out for herself, but must know how to deal with us from the other side. So I'm very interested to hear what Yoon will tell us. Then next to Yoon is Igor Almazov from Power Grid ABB. He, of course, straddles the middle between the superpowers of Europe and China. He comes from the middle ground. He knows about the ways of large industrial companies. He can tell us whether he benefits, let's say, from sustainability. He can say whether he benefits or his company benefits from nationalism. And he can say whether it's healthy and good looking forward to do the either or the other. Then last but not least is Professor Bo Qiangling. He is one of the, let's call it, most prominent experts on energy policy and energy future. He has some very interesting numbers. We had the chance to have dinner with him yesterday, and he knows how to put the angle onto very interesting statistic facts and show us the world is not as simple as we think it is. And so he will close off today's round of panels. And without further ado, I would like to give the word to Henry Lee and let him give you his wisdom. The way the panel functions is we will have each panelist go through with about 5 to 10 minutes of presentations. If there are immediate questions, of course you are allowed to ask them, but then we want to move on to the next panelist. And at the end, there should be an open question and answer session. Thank you very much, and Henry Lee, the stage is yours.
Thank you, thank you. Do this sitting down is okay? All right, okay. So thank you again, Urs. Fantastic introduction. I think he covered the world in 10 minutes and left us with not much really to talk about. But what we can do, I think, is probably what I can do is give you my perspective, and of course, as with any fantastic panel that's been put together, I'm really eagerly awaiting to hear from the other panelists as to what their thoughts are from their respective vantage points. And thank you again, Caspian, for hosting all of us and all of you. This is a fantastic venue that you guys have year-round, right, I think? Is it? No? Oh, just for this event, okay. But it would be nice to have it all year round if there is, because we need more dialogue in this world. And let me start off by just my observation is, I think sadly, as I was reading, the world is becoming more unilateral. And by that, I mean, you know, the US really effectively does what it wants to do. But if you have the world power doing what it wants to do, what it does is it forces all the lesser powers to do what they want to do. And so the unilateralism, which I think has been prompted by the US, is now spreading throughout the world. So not that the rest of the world wants to do what it wants to do, but because you have a global power that is doing what it wants to do, then other people are also forced to do what they need to do. So I think case in point would be China. You know, China wants to engage, but the US wants China to engage on its terms. So it forces China to do various initiatives like the Belt Road. And the Belt Road has been around, I think, for a number of years now. And I think Xi Jinping, when he came to Davos, even spoke about that. It's really I call it in very simple layman terms, it's the anti-containment policy. It's forcing China, instead of going east towards the Pacific, it's forcing China to go west. But I think the benefit is that that part of Central Europe and Central Asia has never really been integrated. So I think if you look from a historical perspective, there's both good and bad in, I think, what will come out, I think, of this paradoxical world that we live in right now. I think the reliance on the large power of the U.S. will lessen, and I think it'll be a chance actually for the more independent parts of the world to get stronger in the meantime. I think also it's important to note that because we have to have dialogue to facilitate the understanding, and I think what will develop is over time, really two large schools of thought, if you will, and I think that one school of thought is economics with democracy, and the other school of thought is economic development without democracy. And as Urs alluded to, the prevailing Western thought is that with economic progress comes democracy, and it becomes a necessary condition. But I think, in the rest of the world, where values are different, I think you can have economic development without democracy in the Western sense. Now, this is very difficult, I think, for most of us who have been exposed to Western thought to understand, because it's natural. It's natural for humans to want to have their own voice, their own right. But I think the rest of the world operates on a very different value system than the U.S. I mean, I grew up in the U.S., but I'm also a citizen, as Urs said, of the world, so I've seen and lived under different systems. I see the benefit of the U.S. system, but really for the U.S., and we have to be honest, the U.S. system is really tailor-made for the U.S. because of its historical origins. But way before the U.S. existed, you had deep countries with historical significance like China, like Central Europe, like Russia, and they've all lived under different systems. And so I think what will happen over time is you'll have two large camps, both progressing from an economic standpoint, but with vastly different, I think, moral philosophies and value systems. So I'm sorry not to provide any answers here, but I'm just providing, thoughts for us to kind of promote further discussion. My comments, again, are extremely general, and just really my own thoughts. So, but let me bring it more specific, because I do want to hear specific thoughts from our panelists too. From an investment standpoint, I think it becomes very interesting, because I think in my investment world and the investment world we're used to, cross-border was always the trend. In other words, Western capital coming into Asia, and obviously Chinese capital acquiring foreign businesses. Unfortunately, I think from an investment perspective, things will change. And I think I'm curious to hear about how Fosun believes and thinks about this, because in many ways, it is a great thing to have economic integration. But on the other hand, I think we can see all the problems that come with that economic integration, because with it becomes the conflict of value systems and so forth. So from an investment perspective, yes, we're finding it extremely difficult, because we do investments around the world, and I think the operating rules around the world are vastly different. I mean, business is business, but when it comes to minority rights, when it comes to, you know, even board dynamics, all of these, I think, frequently create, I guess, if you will, instances where we can see the cultural differences quite dramatically. So I think this is just going to make the world more difficult, because the world, again, back to my central thesis, instead of becoming a more multilateral world, I think it's becoming a more unilateral world.
Thank you, Henry. If there are no pressing questions, I would like to move on to Fabian Goll. Henry, you have to give him your microphone. Thank you. Fabian, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So, good morning, everyone. Since time is very limited, I understand, I will skip my introduction part and start straight away with maybe 3 major misconceptions I do stumble across on a regular basis concerning China. I have spent most of my professional life as a media executive in Shanghai and other places in Asia. And I'm always confronted with the following. So first of all, mainly in Europe, in the West, people are struggling to understand that economic success and prosperity is possible in non-democratic societies as well, in well, rather authoritarian, strictly ruled one-party countries. So in the West, we struggle to understand that. Secondly, Henry, you touched this also, that in the West we like to believe that an economic opening has to be linked to an automatic political opening as well. So we're not seeing this either in China. In fact, since we're seeing rather the opposite, at least since, let's say, the current administration took over a couple of years ago. Ever since, we see, well, rather, instead of a political opening many would have hoped for, we see more centralism, more nationalism. We see basically a unique concentration of power that was unheard of since the times of Mao Zedong. So this is all very, very new and maybe slightly different than the West would have hoped. In any way, this is in no way meant to criticize China, but the West, because we are struggling to understand China. And yeah, so maybe we have to rethink our approach also, instead of maybe, you know, what I also see a lot in Western media is kind of Europe is acting like a moral high ground, is very quick at finger pointing at China, and that is maybe not the very best way of dealing with China, in my humble opinion. The third misconception is that innovation is only possible in open societies, and maybe we will hear more on the topic of innovation from the representative of ABB, for instance. But so China is basically proving all these misconceptions wrong. And the latest one, innovation, China is in a very unique position, as it has unique factors that facilitate innovation. So it, for instance, has many young consumers in a relatively densely populated place, the big cities mainly, many skilled workers. There is an abundance of venture capital. There is a relatively low protection and high willingness of consumers to adapt to new technologies, and in my view, rather quite smart, laissez-faire approach of the Chinese government, who gives a lot of freedom and room for trial and error, much more than in other economies. And that is quite remarkable, I think. A very good friend of mine who has been doing business with China for more than 30 years, he said that, well, this is due to the fact that China has made rather negative experience with the planned economy, and is now Yeah, so that explains the government's defensive reflex to the economic innovations, and that it's no longer forceful. And yeah, of course, that does not mean that every Chinese is an innovator, as is the case in many so-called innovative economies. Now, maybe what facilitates, in my view, development in everywhere in the world are political stability, in solid first-class infrastructure, ideally, and a good level of education. So and China clearly is providing all of that, and does, I think, an excellent job on that. On political stability, something that is of tremendous importance to the government for very understandable reasons, and they are able to provide a manageable level of certainty for investors. I think that's the underlying, that's the main goal of that, and maintaining peace and order, of course. On infrastructure, I mean, everybody who has been living in China or visited China, I guess, was impressed with the quality of infrastructure they were able to put up in such a short period of time. It's simply mind-boggling, and it today has probably, or certainly, one of the best infrastructures worldwide. And with the Belt and Road Initiative, China is now kind of exporting this expertise, this unique expertise it possesses in the field of infrastructure. However, from a European point of view, the Belt and Road Initiative is, generally speaking, viewed rather critically. Especially, there was a lot of negative PR, anti-Chinese PR in Europe when China bought ports in Greece and Italy and in other parts of the world. Whereas the Chinese perspective, of course, is a very different one. It's a rather giving thing that they're doing that is of mutual benefit and something very positive. I guess the truth lies somewhere in between. What is obvious, I think, is that China clearly is pursuing, Henry, you mentioned the US, that is kind of created a world order that is serving themselves in the first place. I fully agree. China is also pursuing a China first strategy ever since, and I mean no malice when I say that. It's fully understandable. Maybe even more countries should pursue such an approach. I don't know. We can maybe discuss that, and maybe some of you disagree or agree. Yeah, maybe briefly, there are also chances involved for Swiss companies. I see that mainly in the field of infrastructure suppliers, financial service providers, banks and reinsurance companies, for instance, and maybe very select companies in the machinery industry. So overall, I think it all boils down to, I mean, China continues to be a contradiction and presenting us with challenges and opportunities alike, and it's all about finding a smart approach and finding a way of balancing these two. Switzerland, I believe, does that very smartly, successfully, and mutually beneficial. And maybe that could also be a way forward for, I don't know, for other countries. I think Switzerland handles China quite intelligently. We're one of the few countries worldwide that has a free trade agreement with China, for instance. So that's a milestone in the history of our foreign relations. I think we will hear more from a second panelist on the free trade agreement. Yeah, maybe to close off, the Belt and Road Initiative is, in my view, a tool to expand China's reach. Of course, it is. Its economical power. It is expanding its influence, its reach. But it's only one tool. There are other tools that are being used. One, for instance, is the Soft Power Initiative that was launched back in, I think it was 2012, when then President Hu Jintao, when he publicly said that China was battered by Western culture and he would like to change that. So that's when he launched, his administration launched this global soft power initiative. So, which is basically aiming at creating trust and understanding, a different understanding for China. We also, so one offspring of that, for instance, are the Confucius Institutes that are mushrooming across the world, also in Switzerland. I think we have 3 now, and a lot more. Something I was personally affected, and something that is not very much known, I believe, is that China is also undertaking a global media offensive, as in they are on a huge shopping spree, purchasing various media, can be websites, magazines, newspapers, TV stations, radio stations, and so forth. And they do this seemingly randomly and globally. Now, I know that firsthand because one of the companies I was managing in China, a medium-sized media company producing business intelligence, we were sold to a Chinese investor who, in a rather shady deal and very intransparent, many months later on, we found out that it's actually he's not a private investor. He is representing the government, and he gets generously funded by the central government with the only purpose of purchasing media titles globally. So that, of course, raises the question: why would China do that? What are their intentions? And I'm not in a position to give an answer. I have to quote one of my Chinese friends who said, well, if they need it, they have it. But yeah, that is also something that is maybe not so well known in the West. Very briefly, and then I would like to pass the microphone on. I do recall a rather absurd situation, in my personal opinion. I think it was it 3 years ago when Xi Jinping, here in Davos, when he presented himself in his speech as kind of a proponent of global free trade and open economies and more or less frictionless trade, whereas at the same time Donald Trump was pictured as a protectionist, anti-free trade. And I am struggling to understand that because when we do a simple comparison of just a few tariffs, import duties, the reality is a completely different one. Just to give you one example, not too many figures, but if you want to import cars into China, the tariffs were 25%. They have now been reduced, I think, to 15%. So it's a rather protective, a well-protected market. When you want to import cars into Europe, there is a 10% duty that applies, and now coming to the US, 2.5%. So, and that's just one product category, but you can go through literally almost everything, from steel to rubber to chemical commodities, whatever it may be. The mechanism is exactly the same. So in reality, I think America always was, and will be open for business, where China is still pursuing a very selective approach. It is allowing, it is opening up gradually, slowly, very selectively, very smartly from their point of view. China first, again, I understand it, but I think it's important to maybe not mix things up. Maybe we can talk later about, if this is of general interest, about some military geopolitical aspects, but for now, I think I would...
Thank you, Fabian. Interesting notes, interesting also to see and to point out that speech of Xi Jinping here in Davos, because at the time he was really protected like that. He was the new world order, the new free world order, and Donald Trump, of course, does everything to prove that he's changing the other way, but you start not from a 0-0 level. You know, one country starts from a different level than the other. But it is part of what I consider the shifts that are taking place. And it is part of a controversy that will probably shape our future. Now, without further ado and without taking the thunder from Joanne, I want to pass the word to you, Joanne.
Because there's a screen, if you don't mind, I will stand here and do a presentation about the fashion business. And also, more importantly, is the sustainability work we have done in fashion. Okay, so very quickly, fashion runs business global-wide for a couple of brands like Lavon, Waffle, St. John Knits in the States, Caruso in Italy, and also Tom Tailor in Germany. So from myself, actually, I start my career from KPMG as an accountant in Big Four, and also then took over as a CFO of a couple of corporations. So I'm not from fashion industry, but I was very shocked by my personal discovery about this sustainability of this industry. First of all, fashion industry is a big market. We have a 2.5 trillion business in fashion, and here there's 150 billion garments made. Can you imagine that? So it's almost like everybody has 20 new per person, like new garments. However, 30% of these garments or the dresses are not used. So we buy it at a discount, for example. We put it into the wardrobe, and we even didn't find a chance to wear it. And there's a couple of data I can show you. In order to make a T-shirt made by cotton, it costs 700 gallons of water. Means a man, if he drinks 8 cups of water every day, it can provide him like a 3.5 years water supply in order to make a cotton-made T-shirt. And the more serious problem is the synthetic problem, because polyester, for example, it takes 200 years for polyester really can be landfills and disposable. And currently about 20% to 35% of the micro plastic pollutions into the ocean is from fashion business. So it was really shocked when I really read this data. So customers are now really starting to care, because if I talk to you that 30% of the dresses you bought you haven't used, but even one shirt take 3.5 years water supply for a mature, like an adult man, it's really scary. So there's more and more concerns about the environment. For example, a study by a UK university said that about if you buy something, about 9% of the customer now put environment impact as a point. This has increased to 18% if it's for the young generation aged 18 to 20 to 24. But this percentage is even higher for vegans. It's rated like 35%. So overall speaking, people are more and more concerned about environment. Look at Davos this year. When we drove from the downtown to here, it's really, the snow here is under my expectation. But if you look at Shanghai in China, the winter is so warm. The heavy jacket we don't need it anymore for this winter. So the global temperature is a problem. However, if when during the customer purchase, if environment is a concern point, it usually more higher impact on the food or healthcare consumption rather than fashion. Because as a lady or man, if you go to like a retail store, usually you won't say, I buy this because it's like a environmental, beneficial, right? Usually, I mean, for our industry, still a lot of work to do. But there's more and more actions taken even by the brands. For example, more luxury brands now stop to using fur. So you heard a lot of news, a lot of people owes to that no fur. And especially for the luxury brands, usually if there's no consumption for the inventories, luxury brands will destroy those merchandise. They won't sell at discount, but now more and more brands say, no, we won't destroy it, because once you destroy it, create more pollutions. And the third one is, more designer brands also cater into that sustainability, like Stella McCartney, which is, she is very famous in the industry, say we should do more to protect our earth and our environment. So now it's in a new decade. Everybody is talking about sustainability. So there's one event, big topic is who made me? So in the past, in your dresses, people don't know the details of the dresses. For example, who made me? Is it in Bangladesh or in Pakistan, or is it in Europe, France, Italian? And then, blockchain technology really drive the changes of people can trace all these fashion pieces, knows whether all the supply chains are managed in a good shape. There's a lot of argument about sustainability, and also the really whether the economics for the brands, how they can make money, because every companies in the past they try to minimize the cost in every step of the manufacture. If we want to switch to a sustainability way, usually it is really costly. Okay, like the traditional way to do this. And the painful point for fashion is that in some seriously polluted industry, it's more concentrated in certain area. But fashion is everywhere, every country, made in Italy, made in France, made in China, made in Pakistan. So fashion is very fragmented. And also when brands want to really protect the environment, however, most of the brands, they don't control the supply chains. So brands and the supply chains are in two ends. So that's why we need to more push for, first of all, governmental support to really support the manufacturers, look at how to improve the plant. There's a lot of movements now on this side. For example, Davos. Davos already, work together, global finance corporations to really invest into technologies just to improve the percentage of the insolution during the whole manufacturing process, or the technology of leak protection to save quite a lot of energies, which also is much greener than before. Or H&M, they launched an event, event about help support and manufacturing to produce by solar or wind energies. Okay, here is the famous people and all the group wearing fashion pack. A lot of brands already signed on that organization to say we need to really protect our earth. Okay, And then more and more certificate was granted for those products, like a waffle. It has two from cradle to cradle, like green golden certificates, which means that including biology and also technology. So either the body is made by waffle, you can, after you use that, you can send back the stores. They can be disposed and put into soil, become some like a nutrition feed the plant, or they can be like reused into another yarn and then produce another type of a new bodies. So all this means that we want the brand want to really enter into a territory that what they produce, the well-used material, 100% disposable and very green. So this is a introduction about the fashion actions on anti-pollution.
My name is Andreas Röhrig, and I'm responsible for product development and innovation at Wolford. My passion is the product and sustainability. Our journey started in 2013. We decided to improve our sustainability in the company. Cradle to cradle is a very holistic approach. In our case, it works that we get the product back from our end consumer, that we give it to our partner. He has a biodegradation facility and they produce biogas, and we are buying this gas and running our production facility with that. The fishnet product is made out of econyl yarn. The econyl yarn is a very special yarn which is made out of fishnet. So you can say we are producing net tight produced out of fishnet. We want to be 50% circular economy by 2025.
Okay, so 2020 is really about our action time, especially for the fashion. And also we will try our best to do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. I did not know that I'm drinking bottles of water when I'm wearing my t-shirts. But I will keep that in my mind in the future. A lot of food for thought. Now let me go to Igor.
Yes, thank you.
Our gentleman from ABB. You might have a different approach, but Igor, the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you. I think it will be quite difficult to speak after such a fascinating speech about fashion. I'm representing industrial company, and probably it's a little bit boring to talk about all sustainable goals which we have in the company. Just a few words about ABB. ABB is a company of about 150,000 people with representation in more than 100 countries, and mostly we are working in electricity world and industrial automation. If you open your small electrical sheet in your apartment, you probably can see some contactors named ABB. That is small device which is most closed for consumers, if you like. But mostly ABB is dedicated to power grids and big industrial projects. Regarding sustainability and globalization, I will probably speak about Caspian region, where I'm personally involved, and which topic we're trying to cover here in this pavilion. ABB, very well presented in Caspian region. We have offices in Georgia, Azerbaijan, Russia, and Kazakhstan. If you look at superpowers, which we are talking about today, all superpowers also presented in the Caspian region. First of all, it's coming from China. Second, it's Russian influence. And third is US. And depending on countries, we have certain presence of each this country, not only in political life, but in economy as well. For instance, Georgia is quite dominated by US products. Kazakhstan, probably Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Russian presence is visible. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, I see more presence of Chinese. For sure, Chinese influence in this region is very high. And what is happening today, that during the international projects, countries even inventing certain tools how to protect themselves in big international tenders. For instance, they implement a rule that local production should have a certain preferences. For instance, 10% or 15% additional discount should be granted for local produce goods. That happens, for instance, in Uzbekistan. And of course, probably that creates unfair competition, but by this tool, country trying to defend themselves. Regarding sustainability goals, ABB today is mostly focusing on three goals. First of all, it's very important for us, it's health and safety, because our workers are over the world, and we're trying to achieve zero fatality. And actually, last year, 2019, we achieved this goal. We didn't have any fatality worldwide. I'm speaking not only ABB itself, but also about ABB partners who are working for ABB during projects. Second, that's very important for us, it's quality. Quality, because despite all efforts which we're doing for the last decades, quality should be anyway increased. And quality in production, quality in goods delivery, design, installations, commissioning, that is in a focus of the company management. And third, probably in Davos, a lot of companies will talk about, but nevertheless, digitalization is also important to have sustainability today. Because with digitalization, we anyway increase level of control in industrial side, in power grids, in apartments, and so on. And that helps us to achieve certain goals. Then we decrease certain cost, because cost today is a driver in many projects and in many companies. And third, of course, we decrease also human involvements. It's also decrease some mistakes. And as last comment, I would like to say that the world is really reshaping now, and global companies are reshaping as well. And we have some tendencies to join to other companies. For instance, it's well known already that Power Grid's business unit of ABB will join to Hitachi. And by this, we also trying to build a sustainability, because we think that by this business model, we achieve more than we had before. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. So you are saying that ABB is undergoing the same shifts and changes like the global powers are. And with the new, I think with the new CEO coming in, the announcement of changes seem to be immense. But good luck anyway. Good luck for the world, and good luck for the ABBians. Yeah, it's the job. Thank you. With this, I would like to give the word over to Professor Lin Bok-Chiang, Dean of the China Institute for Energy and Policy Studies. He has a lot to say, but he cannot say everything. Otherwise, he will talk for the rest of the week. So we will have to try to contain him, but he will have a lot to say. Professor?
No, that's not really true. In fact, I don't have much to say after the excellent panelists or discuss all angles. But I do want to have comment on two of the panelists' discussions. The first one is about the Belt and Road Initiative, by building infrastructure along the Belt and Road. That's what China really wants. And China wants to have a win-win situation. And of course, there's debates about the Belt and Road activities there. One of the major debate is building power plants, coal-fired power plants in for example, Pakistan. Just finished one recently, and people began to question that, under you want to deal with climate change, whether to build a coal-fired power plant at this moment is sensible or not. From my perspective, I think that if there's a demand, there will be a supply. And that's one. Second is that if we can build wind and solar, nuclear or hydro in Pakistan to meet the current power shortage, that would be the best. But the fact is that those are hydro unique potentials. Nuclear, I think most people don't like it. Wind and solar is more expensive and also too slow to build a scale which can meet the power shortage at this moment. So to build a power plant, coal-fired power plant, an effective one, efficient one, I think China can build most efficient power plant in the world at this moment. After many years in the coal-fired power plant business. And let me look at it this way. If the coal-fired power plant somehow can change the consumers' behavior, like cutting trees, like distributed coal-fired burning, coal burning, that might be a good idea. It might be more effective by a huge power plant comparing to individual burning of coal. In fact, that's what China tried to deal with at this moment. So that's one. It might not be such a bad idea. Second is that we have to realize that we in developed countries, particularly, have to understand what are the needs of the poor country. The environment is not everything. For example, let me use China's experience as example. China, over the last 40 years, produced, many people argue, 100 times. Maybe that's true. Water, air, everything. But China's life expectancy increased almost 20 years over the last 40 years. That's the first number. Second number is that Beijing and Shanghai are two of the most polluted cities in China. But the life expectancy in Beijing and Shanghai are highest among all Chinese cities. Now that I'm not arguing that the pollution is good. That's not my intention. My intention is that improve the life expectancy. Just look at this angle. You need something possibly more than the air, dealing with air pollution, like the income, like medical facilities. So if we really understand the poor countries' needs, we might look in the issues differently. So that's one comment on the infrastructure development in China. But China just not build coal-fired power plant along the Belt and Road. They build other infrastructures. That's one. The second one comment, I will comment on the sustainability. The fashion girl just mentioned that we produce 20 new each year. 30% never be wear. That's sustainability issue. In my view, that we are having a system we believe is best for us, which we call market economy. What is essential in market economy? It's to sell. Everybody try to sell everything to you, even though that. So that's why I do not trust big major corporations, not ABB. That's one time that a couple months ago, I asked my students, say, what? I use Apple 6, okay? I bought it about 3 weeks ago. And it becomes so slow, that's incredible. I said, get me an Apple 7. No, my students said, no, we cannot buy it. I said, why? No, it's 11 now. I'm pretty sure that Apple present a very clear social responsibility, and together with the ABB, that they want to have sustainable clean development. So let's say that you build one union, your energy intensity decline, but you buy two, then you come all the way back. So our situation is really fundamental about sustainability. We have a system that everybody try to save everything. On the demand side, human desire is unlimited. If they have income, they will definitely buy it. If you want to buy something, somebody will produce for you, no question about it. If you want to buy something cheaper, they will produce something cheap for you. Even though on the other hand, they say they want to produce something that's sustainable, everything. So if you look at last decades, almost a decade, the income increase and the energy increase still go hand in hand. Not much deviation. There's some improvements, but improvement very slowly. Then you might ask the question, what are the effect of the technology advance both in the demand and supply side? Well, technology advances seem up to this point to not solve the problem of increased income together with increased energy consumption. Look at United States. Even though United States consumes so much low-end, high-energy intensive product from developing countries, its energy demand is still increasing, not decreasing. And that comes to my earlier point. You buy one, even though that energy intensive of that one decline. You buy two, it go back and possibly even more. So that's our fundamental problem, okay? Technology advance will not solve the problem. And what we need to do, I think in my view that we need to change consumer behavior fundamentally. That has forced the corporation to produce something that's not only cheaper, also sustainable. That's one. Second, that if somehow we fail to do that, we cannot contain the energy demand, we do need to change the energy structure. We don't have another choice. Let it go. But let's bring the renewables in a larger scale into the energy system such that we can somehow that reduce the emission and also environment to a certain extent. Now, how to do that? One, of course, is that the government need to determine to do that. Need to determine to do that, need to do not be affected by the short-term fluctuations. Like when economy is good, then you talk more about the environment. When economy is not too good, then you come back and say, okay, let's cut back a bit. So the government need to be determined, need to will to support the renewables. That's from domestic perspective. From international perspective, trade barriers, particularly on the renewables, need to be brought down. Because if some country like China can produce something really cheaper, why not use it? Yes, we do have protections, no question about it. But I think that we should give the renewables a second thought. That's something that's good for all of us, and it's going to deal with the common issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Now, this is the moment where I, of course, have to check my watch, and time is almost over. But even though time is almost over, a panel discussion is not a panel discussion if the floor cannot participate. So please raise your hands and show your hands so that we can see what's going on. Yes, the gentleman from Pakistan.
Thank you very much. A very interesting session, I must say. I represent the logistics industry. FIATA is the organization, and I happen to be from Pakistan, of course. We have heard some discussion in this panel regarding the political connotations of the whole project of the BRI. But there is also a very large commercial side to it, especially as far as the logistics industry is concerned. You know, this project connects the world in a very different way. It connects the world as we've never seen it before. It gives a very huge reach, and it creates a huge opportunities for the logistics industry. And many people, at least in this industry, look at that in a different way. So political issues aside, I think there is a very large dynamics of how the economies of the region or economies of those countries where this thing actually touches, how they will shape up. So this is something food for thought and something that we need to be aware of. The BRI moves into Southeast Asia. There's a vertical connect there. You go further, there's rail connections to Europe. There is through the Caucasus. Then you've got the CPAC project in Pakistan, which is huge, $62 billion. And it only creates an enabling environment. Primarily, it is power plants and road structure. So we're talking about another $150 billion of investment coming into industry. So the dynamics are so large for some economies, it's something to be recognized in that aspect, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I take it that was not really a question, or does anybody of the panel want to reply? Maybe Igor?
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree with you that economical topics is very important for BRI initiatives. And regarding logistics, Caspian region also participates in construction of new ports. Probably, you know, Turkmenistan, Turkmenbashi, yeah, Azerbaijan trying to do the same, and Georgia, Anaklia port. Yeah, that's everything is connected. It's only a question from where they taking those resources to construct ports. Sometimes it's directly from BRI, or sometimes it's completely independent from this initiative. But they go by this way. And of course, corporations, for instance, like ABB, also follows this. And we, for instance, participated in Turkmenbashi port construction. We did a big power station, 220 kV. It's some kind of our impact in BRI, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you. Pierre, and I think that's the last question that we, and I emphasize question, that we can take.
Okay, my name is Ray Leonard. I'd like to respond to Dr. Lin very respectfully, the question of coal-fired power plants. And I'd like to start with just mentioning two very hard truths. One is that if you talk to climate scientists and not politicians, the chance to limit the temperature rise to 2 degrees centigrade is basically gone. We've lost that opportunity. The real chance is to limit it to below 3 degrees. The second hard truth is that the Western nations, the United States and the European Union, contribute only about 20% of greenhouse gas emissions now, and that percentage is dropping every year. By 2025, it'll be 20%. By 2030, it'll be just 15%. So the real battle with greenhouse gas emissions is coming from the rest of the world. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative is a tremendous initiative to rise, to help the living standards of many nations around the world. But one controversial aspect is the building of coal-fired power plants, because coal is the worst of the greenhouse fossil fuel emissions. There is an alternative, and that alternative is natural gas. Now, until recently, natural gas was much more expensive than coal, perhaps 2 to 3 times as much. But because of the surge in exports, the price of natural gas has been cut in half, liquefied natural gas, in just the last 2 or 3 years. So a policy that may have made sense 5 years ago perhaps does not make sense now. And China, in its Belt and Road Initiative, now supports about 70% of all new coal-fired power stations in the Eastern Hemisphere, including places like Pakistan and Bangladesh, where climate change is perhaps the biggest threat to the viability of the nations in the future. So my question is, would China reconsider its policy of coal-fired power plants now, something that may have made sense 5 years ago, but may not make sense now?
Oh, that's certainly true. China themselves do not build new coal-fired power plant now. There's still new coal-fired power plant coming online every year, but those was built, decision was made a long time ago. So the Pakistan one decision was also made about 6, 7 years ago. Yes, situation has been changing, and China definitely respond to that, not only low, Belt and Road, also domestically. If natural gas is affordable, they definitely go for natural gas, and there's no question about it. But you look at the China energy mix, natural gas increase in the last couple of years is the most. Comparing to all others, you hear the large incremental of the wind and solar. In fact, that's not true. The large incremental is natural gas. And that's something we also worried about, because we are looking at natural gas also has CO2 emissions. The last few years, China's coal share in energy mix has been reduced every year by more than 1%. And that's very good. But look at the numbers. Most of the substitution are coming from oil and gas, not much from renewables. But yet China has the largest renewables incremental in the world. What's going on? It's because renewables are so small, even with the rapid increase, it's still not sufficient to meet the demand at the same time to substitute the coal. And that's the dilemma everybody facing. If you look at world today, yeah, renewable increase very fast, but the large incremental still coming from oil and gas and coal. Southeast Asia, with a good economy, the last 10 years, coal almost doubled compared to all others. So it's quite difficult, actually, that making choice between economy as well as what is available. So in my view, the most easier way to substitute the coal is a very slow energy demand for China and for everywhere. But problem is, would that be possible? Thank you.
Thank you very much. With this, I would like to ask the audience to give my panel a great hand of applause. Thank you to all of them. One last sentence to give you a little bit of food for thought as you leave, and maybe recontinue, because there will be a second nice panel just following this one. I want to give you a thesis on your way out. What if the current short-termism of democratic elected countries necessarily leads to nationalism and necessarily leads to exploitation? Possibly you need long-termism and you need other mechanisms to put very, very important policies into place. policies that last longer than your next election period. That's the thesis that I want you to leave this session with. I'm not saying democracies are bad. I live in a very, very respected democracy, but we have to think about this. Thank you very much.
Contributions to the panel. My first question to you would be, what was your main message? What was, do you think, the big takeaway from this panel?
Okay, I think my main message or takeaway from the panel is this is a so dynamic world. Okay, so we are moving fast in every angles, like the energies, the sustainability, the exploration, the Belt and Road. But everything you feel that the world has changed. However, we need to protect our Earth. This is my main message. We only have one Earth. We like the greens. We like the Earth as beautiful as it was. So we need to try our best. Yeah.
Question for you. Wait, should I get somebody to make sure people don't walk in there? Okay. Question for you. What do you think? How do you think we can move towards a more sustainable fashion industry? Exactly to your point, to make sure that we protect our planet.
Yeah, the industry have several issues now. First of all, as we said in the panel, that there's an overproduction. So that people buy, so the brands will produce. I think first of all, we need to change our behavior somehow. We only buy necessary when it is necessary to buy. So to reduce the overproduction, and then we invest into technology, and then green fabrics. Maybe not so cost effective at this moment, but in long run, it's just to make our earth more greener, right? So we have to invest into technology like what the Davos did, those investment into the materials that just increase the insolution, etc., etc. So every small step that will make our supply chain like a greener and then more sustainable. So investing into supply chain, investing into the sustainability technology, and of course change our mindset. I mean, we need to protect the home. This is our home. Yeah. Okay.
No, I really like what you're saying. We need to protect our home, and I like all of the things you're saying of behaviors and technology and investments we should make for the future. One last question for you. Do you know any good initiatives or companies or behaviors that are already happening that you could recommend, or that you think are the initiatives of the future?
Yeah, I gave an example. Actually, it also belongs to Fosun fashion group. It's a workforce, the from cradle to cradle collection. So actually. Everything 100% disposable into the earth. Either, it can be disposable into the soil, it can nurture the plant, or it can be reused as a yarn and then reproduced to the new merchandise. So that kind of investment and technologies already, I think not only one, for a lot of brands is now starting and then really try their best efforts to really involving that technology. And also you see the sexy fishnet tights, right? I mean, this is beautiful, but that was made by fishnet.
Well, I'll make sure to get a pair. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful week in Davos this week. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
The nationalism, sustainability, and the second panel, we will continue to talk about globalization and something recently just happened. The US and China just signed the first stage of the trade agreement, as well as the technology and what is the role of the technology. First, I introduce myself. This is the panel that we co-organized with Swiss Asian Chamber of Commerce and then the Caspian Week, together with New Silk Road Institute, particularly focused on the cross-continental relationship from the geopolitical economic perspective. And I am the professor from the Erasmus University, the Netherlands, also the Associate Dean of Rotterdam's School of Management. I will quickly start introducing this topic. As we already know that this year is actually the 50 years of anniversary of the World Economic Forum. And the theme of the World Economic Forum is always talking about the stakeholder. But for the 50 years, it seems really difficult to transfer from the stakeholder perspective, actually from the shareholder perspective to stakeholder perspective. So there is a large gap between what we really want to do and we are actually doing, which is called we are aiming to sustainability. We are aiming to the UN's SDG 17 goals, but at the same time, we have to follow the capitalism. We have to follow the market-oriented system. We have to always remember that in 3 years, we need to give the return to our shareholders. We have to always think, how can I improve or changing our consumer behavior? So from every layer of this society, something going wrong. It's not going wrong in our mental, intellectual perspective. It's something going wrong between the relationship of our mental and behavioral perspective, which we always call that we aim for something, but we behave different things. And globalization has been called for more than 3 decades because theoretically, we always say that globalization and international trade very good for both developed countries and developing countries in terms of the product, in terms of information, in terms of the label exchange. But recent years, you already think that globalization has a semi-mixed function because it also provides some of the job losing for the developed countries, and it's also caused a hate crisis between developed countries and developing countries. So we are moving towards the track that we are far away from our original motivation. And it is also part of our human beings' weakness that we desire too much and we desire power too much. And we have this hate crisis, which is a topic of 2020 that emerging in every one of us. So this panel, we're talking about this because technology will bring us together, will actually destroy globalization. We don't need to continue our global value chain, manufacturing chain, in order to have global competitive advantage. Because of the technology, every company, every human beings can represent themselves and can have local competitive advantage, which means that globalization probably will disappear. Is that good or not? And it's already happened between the biggest economic power, China and the USA. So based on this, we'll continue to discuss following the last session. So in this session, I have very esteemed speakers who is a thought leader in this area. And first is Dr. Christian Etter, who is actually the head of the delegation of trade agreement between China and Switzerland. He's very prestigious expert in trade agreement. If any country want to get the free trade agreement with China, Switzerland always the reference to look at. So I'm very much looking forward to hear Chris' opinion. And second is the Professor Dr. Bing Xiang. He's actually the founding dean from CKGSB. Probably most of us don't know the CKGSB. I will give a brief introduction. China is large, right? State-owned companies also large. But China's majority GDP contribution actually from the private companies. China is most entrepreneurial countries in this world and the most contributed by private firms. And Professor Bing Xiang's school is actually educating the most leading entrepreneurs in China whose company value contribution is about 50 to 60% of China's GDP. So then you can imagine how powerful he is. I'm really grateful he's here. And sometimes if you want to deliver a message to Chinese economy, you don't need to deliver to Chinese government, deliver to him. It's very powerful. And then actually the third panelist, we invited the president of Pakistan-China Economic Corridor, but because of the visa and logistic issues, he cannot be here. So I have to ask the moderator from the last session to pretend that he's speaking on behalf of him, but actually he's speaking on behalf of Swiss side. Dr. Urs Lustenberger, he's a lawyer. He's also the chairman of the Swiss Asian Chamber of Commerce, and he will talk about his opinion and his experience about this topic. And then next is Toxin Low. He's a senior advisor of EU TCE from Zurich and Germany. He's a very, very knowledgeable person that I always think, how come he's not doctor? He should give an honorary doctor from one of the universities. I'm very much looking forward to hear the latest update from the Toxin Law about the technology relationship between EU, Europe, and China. And then the last but not least, we have Igor again from the ABB Power Grids, because actually he's sitting in this panel, but last panel there was a little bit logistical issues. So you have to speak again. Okay, let's quickly start the panel. I will first give the floor to Kristen Atter and talk about, please tell us what is your opinion of generally first the BRI and the New World Order, and what is your first advice to Switzerland and China, how to deal with the first stage of China-US trade agreement, because this trade agreement has 8 chapters, but in the end, it will influence Europe very much.
Thank you very much, Ying. You're charging a heavy burden on me, particularly commenting on the world order. I mean, this is a very pathetic term. In my view, the world order is an endogenous result of many influences: political, economic, technological, nature, natural environment. So, I mean, it's an order, but it's a rather spontaneous order, I would say, in spite of the fact, of course, that there are major powers who have more influence on the so-called world order than others. Let me pick out 2 recent developments. One rather encouraging, I'll start with that to keep you staying. And then I will also address a rather more worrying aspect, which of course has to do with what you mentioned in the beginning, namely the increasing fact of unilateral or bilateral trade agreements or efforts to come to conclude such agreements, which are not always successful. But this is the rather encouraging aspect. I mean, the players, also the big players, are still talking to each other. I mean, the most recent example is this Phase 1 US-China agreement, which is encouraging. I mean, we're all aware that this has probably a lot to do with the situation in the US, the existing president running for office again. So he has all the interest to do deals, which will hopefully be productive, not only for the 2 parties involved, but for the world economy altogether. There are other examples. I mean, the USMCA, the follow-up agreement to NAFTA, seems to have now been concluded. There are negotiations ongoing between the US and Japan, in spite of the fact that TPP will now continue without the US, which is anyway also quite encouraging that the TPP countries, minus the US, are striving for a very large trade agreement anyway. Then the EU is negotiating with Mercosur. There's RCEP in Asia, which could be a very big thing, even if India, for the time being, as we learn, is a bit more hesitant to really join. But these are quite encouraging developments in spite of all the danger, I would say. Now, what is a bit more worrying is the development in the WTO, which, as you know, the World Trade Organization, which is sort of the umbrella rule of law organization for world trade. And world trade has, of course, a lot to do with international investment flows also. And last December, unfortunately, the appellate body of the dispute settlement system of the WTO is not operational anymore because the US refused to join the consensus to nominate new members to this appellate body, which is sort of the Supreme Court in WTO dispute resolution mechanism. This means this body is now down to 2 people and the quorum is 3 people, so they cannot take decisions anymore. And this is, sounds rather technical, but the implications are rather practical, because this means that disputes decided by WTO panels, and there are many ongoing panels, there were many panels in the past, and in spite of all the criticism directed to the WTO, many countries, including the US, make use of this mechanism and very often are on the winning end. Sometimes they're on the losing end. That's normal in such procedures. But now these panel decisions risk to end up in a vacuum, because as soon as a losing party appeals such a decision on unfair tariffs, on whatever behavior which would not be in conformity with WTO rules, the appeal would go to the appellate body, but the appellate body cannot do anything about it because they don't have the quorum anymore. So this means these decisions cannot be enforced anymore, and which again most likely will mean that the parties to the disputes will not anymore feel to be bound by these decisions because the appeal is not going forward. So this means that the rule of law, so to speak, of international trade and investment rules will likely become more fragmented, because if there are disputes, the parties will try to resolve them either unilaterally, which is not a real resolution, but just a power play, or they will try to resolve it bilaterally, which is maybe a second best, but as I mentioned, which will lead to the fact that the rule of law will become more fragmented. More fragmented trade legislation around the world means less legal security, and I do not have to remind the audience that diminished legal security, of course, is bad for investment, is bad for trade, is bad for economic development, so is bad for the peoples around the world. So what, I mean, I somewhere read in the introduction to the panel that we should also present solutions. I mean, I don't pretend I have solutions, but what I would like to say is that around the world, particularly, of course, leaders of the big players should recognize that economic nationalism is a short-term illusion at best. I mean, in the end, all parties, including the bigger ones, tend to lose in a world where the rule of law is weakened. So this would be my message for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You pretty much touched the point of rule of law is actually weakening. In my opinion, rule of people is actually collapsing. So I really want to hear from Professor Bing Xiang. You're the school that's really educating people, executive entrepreneurs. How would you educate those people to be the leader and future leader to actually give the world a better rule of people and the law?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me here. And there are a few points I would like to share with you. Actually, when I did a talk in DC 209, I expressed my key concern, which I called imbalance of development models. What I mean by that, when Ms. Thatcher studied the neoliberalism in 1979, followed by President Reagan in 1981, and by Deng Xiaoping. So I think China, US have embraced neoliberalism more fully than many other economies. So in my argument, I think China, US economically have become the most capitalist country on earth. Because in China, we don't have universal health care. We only cover the education of 9th grade. We don't have universal pension system. No unemployment insurance, the Gini coefficient, a measure of income inequality, second only to Brazil. If we go by governmental data, still 0.467. So domestically, China, US having serious problem income wealth inequality. Externally, China, US collectively putting too much pressure on Europe, which is socialistic in nature. So that's what I call the imbalance of development models. If we don't have a balance in that regard, it's going to be difficult for any politician to sell globalization, despite the fact it is good. Okay, that's very important. If we just talk about globalization, you will not fix the problem. To me, that's far more fundamental than just globalization per se. So globalization has become a scapegoat for all the problems we see, and a key source of this economic nationalism. So this is point number one. And point number two, the WTO. Well, when China, US had different views about reconfiguration global trading system, when President Obama was TPP, TTIP, essentially new WTO without China. And China started with Belt, Road, RCEP, and many, a new experimental trading zone started with Shanghai and many other things, And especially after President Trump took over the power, his American first. When you have a largest economy, say American first, and I think we may be already in the era of post-WTO, whether you like it or not. It's very important. U.S. is indispensable nation. When the U.S. saying anything like that, doing anything like that, it's already post-WTO, whether you like it or not. I think we're in the era of bilateral deals, trilateral deals, or regional deals. I think the global deals like WTO will be way off decades later. So you see a flood of bilateral, trilateral regional deals. I think it's high possibility for China, Korea, and Japan to get together with ASEAN to form a new trading bloc, with the EU, new NAFTA, and RCEP, all of that in the forming. So I think we're already in a new era, and I think and thirdly, regarding this, I was here, my myopia of government, and I would call it myopia of collective myopia of humanities. What I mean by that, you look at the political system in the East, whether or West, whether it's liberal democracy or authoritarian. I look at the business system, East, West, no long-term incentive whatsoever provided for our political and the business leaders. I mean, 10 years is nothing for humanity. China, we have 5,000 years civilization. 300 years, roughly a dynastic change. Every 300 years, we have a dynastic change. Rather than business cycle, we have a dynastic cycles, So when you don't provide any incentive for our leaders to really care about long-term future of humanity, that's going to be a problem. Especially today, we have so much technology. 200, 300 years ago, okay. Today, we have so much leverage, so much technology. but our whole incentive system, roughly the same. 10 years, we call long term. You know, in business school, we teach present value, discounted cash flows. $1, 100 years later, discounted 10% into today's dollar, virtually nothing now, okay? So we generate one generation after generation of really myopic business leaders. We potentially can spell the end of humanity if we keep going like that, you know? And then I don't have solutions to all those problems. That's the reason why in 2005, we were the first business school to incorporate humanities into the curriculum of business schools. I mean, at least the history, philosophy, religions, you know. And then in 2008, we were the first business school to have a required module for our EMBA students. 6 days social work required, not an elective. You have to do that to get a degree from our school. And 2018, we started with a social innovation. We would like to bring the business, government, international organization, NGOs together to focus on 3 issues: income, wealth, inequality, diminishing social mobility, and the sustainability. 3 of the issues we think we can contribute, okay? So right now, social innovation is required module for all our degree program, all, not just the EMBA, all our degree program. And then there's some sort of experiment we have tried since all the way to 2005, right? So I'll stop now. I can talk for 3 days. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. I want to continue ask you one question, because you are the first school in this world introducing humanity into the executive education. Is there any consequences?
Yes, because I could not change the political system. I could not change the business system. By seeds of humanities, at least you have some of our students look at business issue a bit long term. Let's look issue the historical way, not just the present value of discounted cash flows. And also it is important for them to compete with compassion, empathy, not winners take all, not winners take all. And also to me, the single most important challenge for re-emergence of China as a superpower is really what I call the value connection, value connection. And then humanity is essential for that value connection, not the technology, not marketing, not just finance. And then so there are many, also I want our students, many of them are super rich, you know, including Jack Ma, our most famous alum is Jack Ma. But, you know, many of our students are already very affluent. It's very important for them to live enriched life, not just a rich life, and maybe enlightened life if attainable. So, and also the sense of humanity is essential for good corporate conduct, not just SEC regulation, not just CSRC regulation. That's the pressure from outside. So those are many of the reasons why we did that. And then I think it's definitely the right thing to do. Yeah, you cannot solve all the problem. You got to start from somewhere. You know, so, yes.
Thank you. May I kindly ask that corner of people to keep quiet and then stop talking? If you really want to talk, you can go downstairs. We have a space to talk. But right now, it's a panel discussion, so I really expect you can give a little bit of respect to our panelists who fly thousands of miles coming here. Thank you. The next is Dr. Urs Lustenberger. What is your opinion from legal and economic business perspective?
Well, you know, after these previous speakers, they stole much of my thunder because they have, first of all, pointed out what really bugs me the most, that the WTO system doesn't have an appellate court anymore, which basically makes it defunct. It's now a free-for-all. Every country can do whatever they want. They can abuse all the rules. And if you want to go and take the rule of law and take any remedies, you will be stuck. So the existence of the WTO is now futile. It's a talking place where you can do the 5,000th round of the Doha round, and where you will never find a conclusion. So where you can sit together and at least in specific blocks can discuss what in those trading blocks you will do. At least you meet each other. But as a WTO, it doesn't function anymore. So to me, that is reality. To me, it's a pity, because I am chairing the Swiss Asian Chamber of Commerce because I believe in global free trade. I believe that the world is better if goods are moving fast and easy from A to B. I think the development of the world will be better. I believe it's a better way of creating people that come out of poverty. It's a better way of trying to also distribute values if you're interested in doing that. But it's a very democratic way in doing that. So I'm a big believer in free trade. And I'm, to a certain extent, a bit sad that global free trade is probably on its way down. I like the interesting thought of Professor Bing that the term globalization and all the discussion that comes with it is often used as a scapegoat for underlying problems. And always when there are terms that are not clearly defined, when they are fuzzy, and people start to talk about them, the visions and solutions and ideas that they come up with, they're also fuzzy. They are bad, usually. So the world would need to start defining the terms better, use the same language, learn to communicate about the same things, and not just talk in little snippets that you can publicize on Twitter, where you can convince with a motto someone for 15 minutes and then have a following that lasts maybe half a day and hope the next day everyone has forgotten that the underlying problem you have not dealt with. You see me projecting a relatively pessimistic view. I think the world and these big topics has been hijacked by fast-moving technological news. And I believe the world would deserve better. We would deserve thoughts to be clearer defined, visions to be clearer developed. And if you do that, I would hope the world would come to the conclusion that global trade and global free trade is a good and it's not a bad. It would help me to get this pen cheaper. It would help me to get this boot cheaper. It would help me to spread my ideas clear, and it would hopefully also help to spread the truth clear, because currently what is being spread is not the truth. It's the opinion of a pressure group. So we are opined by from various pressure groups. I can't tell the truth from fake news anymore. And so I just walk through the world and listen to things and deal with it in my own private filter way. But I don't know anymore if I'm right or wrong. And that saddens me. And it saddens me even more for my children. Because what will they do? They have even less of a capacity to deal with whatever gets into them. So, ending it on a positive note, at least we live in a country that still believes in free trade. I hope, and this country being Switzerland, I hope we will be able, through discussion rounds as this one, we will be able to open the eyes and the minds of a few people, and I hope we will be able to move forward to use technology in a positive way. Currently, it's probably partly used in a positive way, but also partly used in a not so positive way. And with this, I think I want to end it.
You talk something similar to Donald Trump, fake news.
Thank you.
You know, Professor Xiangbing mentioned the solution from, not solution, but actually the effort from the education sector. As a lawyer, where to start? Where is your hint to start from to reach your belief?
Okay. This is a very, very heavy question to a lawyer because if you look at how the law in the Western society is built up, then initially the most important aspect of the law is usually the Constitution. And the Constitution defines the relationship between the individual and the state, the government. Because the government has to have a reason why it is the government, why it is allowed to rule, why it is allowed to punish, why it is allowed to collect taxes. And on this Constitution, all the other laws are based. And if you now look at modern society, you come to the conclusion, my usual interaction with the state is not so big anymore in the Western world. My daily interaction is much bigger with my employer, or much bigger with the large company. And so there is a line of thought in me that says we should rebalance the Constitution. We should have companies and rules about companies in there, because some of these companies are more powerful and affect my life more powerfully than my state. Because my state, my government here in Switzerland, they keep quiet. You know, they don't observe me every day. If I fulfill my duties, it's fine. But some of these companies, they observe me every day. They know every little dirty secret about me, and they do with it whatever they want to. So in some ways, there would be rules needed to deal with my relationship with some of these very, very powerful companies. They could be food producers, they could be data collectors, they could be my shopping mall that knows every little move that I do nowadays. So in that respect, coming back to this, what should we do? I think we should do a basic rethink, like a reset button, and say these traditional rules, the traditional fabric of how we define the laws should be rethought. I'm not saying I know the answer and I don't have the solution, but I think the world is ready for a basic remix. And we are in a time where these remixes could be done and maybe should be done.
Yeah, thank you. I think if it was me, I would suggest all the lawyers, all the legal education students should start learning technology and data science, because currently every one of us carrying capital, which is data capital, technology capital. We are not in the past century, 1950s, that property is capital, but every one of us, every data we we create is capital. So everyone is very rich in this house, that means. And then from the technology perspective, how to define the new constitution, how to use properly technology, how to develop a moral agorism would be a biggest question. I would give this question to Toxin Long. Maybe you can give us some of the inspiration, insights.
Not sure if I'm, thanks very much, Ying. I'm not sure if I'm able to give any inspiration, but the reason I'm not a professor is I dropped out of school. Very simple. And I decided to pursue my own education, the real world education, and I was lured by money. I became an investment banker in the City of London. But I've been covering technology, mobile communications, since the early days. In fact, in '87, when we were still in the analog environment, when the mobile phone was a brick, we weren't even close to 1G then. We were moving to 5G. But let me just start with the technology, and because something has really opened up recently, and I just noticed Huawei is a few blocks away from here. We're going to see a fracturing in what I would call a leapfrog technology. It's a leapfrog technology. 5G, where it's implemented, is going to redefine the world in which we live, communicate, interact. I hope not go to war, but I hope never will that happen. Perhaps make peace. And this wouldn't have happened without 4G, so while we take these things for granted. So that's going to be first thing I want to mention is there's going to be a bifurcation of technology, whether we like it or not. And this bifurcation is coming because there are two unnatural bedfellows. The US, with the #1 country proposition, and China, with its very well defined, very well articulated 2025 Made in China program. These two actually are not, as I said, natural bedfellows. Of course, my next question is, where is the largest trading bloc in the world, the EU, going to stand in all of this? Now, while we talk about all this, just want to go back to the Belt and Road Initiative because we are dealing with this right now. Don't forget, there's 6 corridors in this BRI. We just tend to extrapolate a few lines. And it's going through terrain we're not familiar with, where there are issues with food, sanitation, and water. I'm not even talking about electrification yet. And by the way, electrification is going to be 50 to 60% all the capital expenditure that's going to go into BRI. So note that that's going to be the case. A third of that's going to go into transportation, which is also natural. The one that's moving fastest, that's attracted the most investment for now is Pakistan. The Pakistani corridor, partly because of geostrategic reasons, has moved very fast. There's some that are going to be clogged a bit. Maritime routes will get into certain disputes, particularly in the ASEAN, the South China Sea area. So it's going to be a very lumpy, don't think of it as smooth Silk Road. There's a nice railway line that goes from Chongqing to Duisburg, which now, thanks to our Gotthard Basis Tunnel, has linked it right up to Lombardy or the ports of Italy. So we do have the basis of actually quite a few channels. But within this corridor, we're going to have technology issues, human resource issues. We're going to have financing issues because unlike the expansion of, if you like, in the earlier phases of I used to work for a Japanese bank, and I was head of privatization. We, after the US, we were the biggest, Japan was the biggest provider of funds for privatization in Europe. We at Daiwa, where I was head of privatization, underwrote the entire UK water privatization. That is, and there was no political backlash at that time. So I just want to remind you that these waves have happened before, and China is now the emerging power here. Now, tech divide is very interesting because we're actually at the cusp of a next wave. 5G is just an enabling platform. Don't get too obsessed with 5G. What's happening is processing power, the cloud, and machine learning have improved exponentially. In fact, we won't even be talking about Industry 4.0 anymore if you look carefully at what's going on right now. If you really get into the guts of it, we are moving well beyond just simple, if you call it dual track loop, feedback loop, what you find in an Airbus autopilot. We've moved way beyond that. We are going to see really a divide, firstly the divide coming from the clash in technology between two superpowers, two super players. And then we're also going to see a digital divide between rich nations, the haves, and the have-nots. I think that's really very interesting. In Switzerland, we're going to be very lucky because we'll have the 5G network across, other than in some of the more mountainous regions, but we're a wealthy country. Many countries will not be able to afford anything quite close to this. There will have to be enabling technologies. Now, how has China solved it? Don't forget that part of BRI is space. I've actually become very interested in space recently, and China has integrated and incorporated space as part of Belt Road Initiative. So it has launched a satellite for Ethiopia. It is providing SATCOMs to some of the countries along the BRI, because the question that arose was before you even have any integrity of the system. How do we communicate? How do we get materials? What are the logistics, etc.? How is that all happening? How is China engaging with the rest of the world? It's engaging in a rather unconventional way. I would say it's patchwork and it's piecemeal. So I think this digital divide is going to be a big topic. The tech divide is going to be very interesting. I am not suggesting that both are going fully their own ways, because at the end of the day, they feed off each other. And so it is going to merge in some areas, separate in other parts as well. So that's my 2 cents worth of.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you a question. 2 days ago, European Commission issued a decision that all the countries need to use European telecommunication infrastructure product rather than made in China product, like Huawei product, even though the price is much higher, the efficiency is much lower in order to build the 5G infrastructure. It seems very much against to the free market, but of course EU has its own concern that for the national or regional security. What do you think of this decision?
That's a very tall order. That's a very tall order, because many of the components in the core actually have China in the value chain. And one of my earlier thoughts was perhaps we could shift by having deeper joint ventures between the two largest European players, and I only want to talk about this in a European context, which are Ericsson and Nokia. In fact, Ericsson, don't forget, was in China in 1890 already. I mean, and they have a joint venture with in Nanjing. I think, I'm not sure whether it's Nanjing or another city, but they've been there for decades, producing equipment, doing R&D, etc. So China's already pretty much embedded through joint ventures. In fact, it's Europe that's been going there as well, because European companies do not have the critical mass of a hinterland to manufacture any of these components at any competitive price. So would you pay 3 times, 4 times more for your, I would say, I wouldn't call it 5G, because we're not going to move to 5G straight away. You know, you're not going to afford it. I just want to touch on security. The reason there are security concerns, there definitely are, but the pressure is not on Europe head on. It really is on the Five Eyes. So Britain is affected. New Zealand, Australia share a common intelligence platform, and that must not be underestimated. And don't forget that New Zealand was one of the first countries to bar Huawei from getting involved in the infrastructure. The biggest thing that's happening is chips and chip design. There is a leapfrog happening right now, which people are not looking at. They've looked at the phone, they've looked at content, they've looked at all of that. They've looked at the providers, they're too obsessed with social media. But chip design and chip miniaturization is leapfrogging. We're going to, McKinsey have said that the technology might get ahead of us right now. And I think that's precisely what's happening. And that's the trade war, because these things are fed also into the military complex in both countries and in other countries around the world. That is key. But you know, we live in a very, very interrelated world. And I always like to give this as an example. Hurricane Katrina, the monitoring of the destruction caused by it was one of the biggest disasters in America. It was all done by a Pakistani satellite. And that satellite was launched by the University of Surrey. That was a company that brought this satellite up into orbit, and it was providing all the data for the emergency services in the United States during Katrina. So I just want to show you how interconnected we are. And you mentioned pen, Urs. A pencil, I think, is a product of 30 countries or so, your basic pencil.
Okay, thank you. Let me quickly move to the next speaker. Not yet. to the next speaker, Igor. You represent ABB, and ABB is kind of covering all the keywords of our panel: globalization, technology, BRI, New World Order. I've been joining many times of ABB event in Davos. It's always mentioning that technology will not replace human jobs. And also, when I go back to China, even in my hometown, second-tier city, in a very secret corner, I also saw ABB. So ABB is everywhere, really globalized. And currently facing the technology dispute and also the trade dispute, trade war. What is the situation in ABB? And what is the concern and challenge and your solution of ABB?
Yes, thank you. Yes, ABB is a really global company. And as I have already said, we have about 100 representations in the world. And globalization for global company, it's really good stuff. We like globalization. But if you look into reality, that's where we are today, we don't see global tendencies in the regions where we are working. Again, just to be more precise, I come to Caspian region. In the Caspian region, we have quite clear two tendencies of two type of countries which accept globalization and others not so much. For instance, small countries which don't have capacity to produce high-tech equipment, they are quite happy for globalization. They open borders, they invite big market players, and by this they develop competition. And by competition, they have decreasing price level. That's what they want. Look at countries bigger size. For instance, Russia, Kazakhstan, or even Uzbekistan. They don't open completely borders. They're trying to develop some I'm talking about high-tech equipment by themselves, and trying to offer it locally, first of all, and even outside. And by this, of course, the questions of globalizations, accepting them by different way. They don't accept that prices from ABB, for instance, are high, that technologies from ABB are much better than, for instance, in Russia, especially for electrical equipment. And electrical equipment, Russians are quite well developed. That is why global companies have to adapt their policies, global policies, probably to, not to each country, but at least to the regions. Today we don't see this a big tendency of globalization everywhere. I would say that if we have capacity to buy products, we have money to buy products, then we are for globalization. If we don't, then we are against of that, because we need to do something by ourselves as well. And for global companies, it's very important to understand this and adapt policies for regions. For instance, ABB opened factories in Russia. They have 6 factories which produce local products, and they products becoming already not European, local ones. Or we involve local commissioning companies or installation companies for big projects. Also, we use locals to be together. That is, I think, we have to understand on a corporate level that globalization is very important, but the world have to be united, and we have to understand regional politics as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We still have some time, so I would open the floor for our audience asking questions. Be short and be concrete, be short, and not promotion of your event here, because this is the discussion. First, you introduce yourself, where you're from, and quickly your questions and comments, okay?
I have a question for Professor Xiang. My name is Yue Chou. I live in Geneva, where people would consider it a rather dramatic statement to hear what you pronounced the post-WTO era, yes. In your view, is there any way still that we can bring the US back into this multilateral world? We can think about the advantage for the America to go the bilateral way, but the world is also made up by surprises. Sometimes there are unpredictable consequences of that.
To me, the chance is very low because right now with Trump as the president of the United States, and I think after this phase one deal between US-China, it's going to be so difficult to come up with phase number two. And the probability for the relation to further deteriorate is higher than getting better. And because you look at the consensus in the U.S., you look at the Congress, you know, the leading expert, China expert from the U.S., and many American companies. They have invested in China. Some of them have felt, you know, they're not doing well in China market. So some were strong supporter of integration between China-U.S. relations. I think they have switched their stand, you know. So the real pro-China, let's say pro-China, pro-U.S.-China relation group are really the top companies from the U.S. that have invested in China. But some of them have changed their stand. So it's going to be difficult. When China, U.S. have a relation like that, it's going to be virtually impossible to have new round of WTOs, you know. So that's my view on that. Thank you.
Any questions?
Can I offer some remark on something also we have been doing for the past 6 years, not only the social innovation front, but also what I call economic disruptions. I look at the economy around the globe. The beauty of China's economy for the past 30-some years, we always have new kids on the block, new large-scale companies, new billionaires, okay? If you compare China with India, look at the 10 richest people in India, virtually no change for 20 years. Look at rich people in China. They don't stay as the richest person for more than 2 years, always disrupted by new kids on the block, you know. So that's one key reason why, you know, we started 1978 with like India, China, GDP roughly the same. Now China GDP is 5 times bigger than that of India. Disruptions. If you compare China with Japan, Japan is excellent in innovations, but look at the disruptions. They don't do well. I mean, no new large-scale company emerged, no new billionaires. You look at the top 400-some, 494 unicorn companies, only 2 coming from Japan. Japan may not do well in the future. So that's the reason why we started this disruption program in China 6 years ago, and we export that to Japan, to Korea, to ASEAN, to Latin America, and to Europe, I hope. Europe also needs that kind of disruptions because you got to give young people a hope. If you don't, You see the problem, you know, in many, including France, my God, you know, I'm so surprised, you know. So whatever, developing economy, you know, liberal democracy, authoritarian, if you don't have that chance giving to young people, I think you could have a flood of social problem to come.
Are there any questions, comments from our audience? I have a question, actually. I have a question. If I bring back the questions in the beginning of introduction, I want to ask every panelist here today, what will be the future picture, very near future and long future? What will be the picture of that? We will have globalization or not? We will have international trade or not? What kind of company we will have? What kind of institution, government we will have?
Thank you. Well, of course we will have globalization, because globalization is driven by technology, by technological development. And this is, I mean, it's not really exogenous, but it's happening. I mean, globalization is driven by communication technology, transportation technology, information technology. I mean, even if governments and societies would be stable, no disruptions, globalization would produce disruptions by the very technology. I mean, it's actually the technology which produces the disruptions. And the main effect, and we like to call it globalization because it's so global a phenomenon and encompassing a phenomenon, but there are developments going on which are more or less independent of policy. I mean, of course, I disregard, it has been mentioned, let's hope there won't be big wars in the future. I mean, of course, these would be disruptions beyond technology. But save for that, I think we will have globalization. Companies will have to face it, and some will do, and they will prosper, some will not, and they will disappear, and especially new ones, I'm sure, will be coming up. I mean, someone said today, we like to think 10 years as rather medium or even long term, but we have to think in much longer terms. And then it's very obvious that there will be new companies, that there will be outgoing companies, and it's impossible to predict in what direction it will go, but it will be probably along the lines of ever more sophisticated technology. And I'm not saying that, how some people do, artificial intelligence will replace the human brain in the end. I don't think so. I mean, I recently read a quote from Pablo Picasso in the 1920s or so, where he said, computers are useless because they can only give answers. I mean, the first part of his remark is not really well taken, but the second part will hold even with the most sophisticated artificial intelligence. It will only be able to give answers. We have to ask the questions.
Well, relating to AI, I think the key element or potential effect of technology disruption is the possibility the first level distribution wealth will become unequal. If that's the case, I do see socialism, a strong proactive role of a government will come back globally, including China and the US. And then I was not surprised by the rise of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and that was not the case 10 years ago. Now you see the difference, you know. In terms of globalization, like even we may be in the era post-WTO, this does not mean globalization is ended, you know, it will take a different form. So the bilateral, trilateral regional deals will be more popular. I see more integration, for example, in the whole region, China, Korea, Japan, and ASEAN. So, you know, so this is going to be more regionalist. And even in the scenario where a war is erupted between US, China, and it's more like many years ago, 20 years ago, there's no direct flight between mainland China and Taiwan. What we did, we flew via Hong Kong and Macau. So the traffic will continue. You see flood of Chinese companies making investment in ASEAN countries and Latin American countries. So the global supply chain will be reconfigured. But it's a matter of just cost will be higher. It will be higher cost for the Chinese companies to export to US. It will be more costly for the American company to take advantage of the Chinese market. So I think the traffic will continue. It will be more costly, more regionalism. I mean, it's going to be globalization moving forward, but different format, different form.
Thank you. Now, I want to give it a different angle. Will there be globalization in the future? I say yes. And I want you just to look at some of the multinational companies. And then you might also see what kind of taste that globalization will have. I think the multinational companies are those companies who have been most capable in dealing with all the differences and difficulties of doing cross-border trade. They will continue to be there. They will continue to maneuver these cliffs and rocks and bottoms in the sea, and they will be able to still do trade. It might be not as efficient, but they will do it. But I want you to look at a different angle. When you see the deep belief of any capitalist multinational company, then you would also assume that they, almost by their own laws, would always move to the most efficient tax country with their corporate headquarters. Now they don't. You find out if you look at the world of the multinationals, they don't. But they usually have a hook, or somebody has a hook into them. Then if you further look away from, let's say, the food traders, and maybe just look at the multinational technology company, you might also start to imagine what kind of hook that is. And if you see the argument that the US has brought up against Huawei, you must think deeper and think, why are the Googles, why are the whatever companies, the Microsofts, why are they still based in the US? Why does the US allow them to adapt to a very specific tax regime where they can keep taxable income offshore for such a long time? Why is there this combination? And then you start to see globalization will be a power extension in the future, and more so and more so. It will not be globalization just in per se something good, but it will be an extension of certain power that is localized at the base where these companies are. So to a certain extent, it might be right that we are suspicious of TikTok, but to the other extent, it might also be right that we should be suspicious of other companies. And when you see, you know, Professor Bing was shaking his head over France. Yes, France is a mess, but they try to do some things like taxing some of these multinationals at the base where they make the money. And to a certain extent, this will be what will be happening. Because why do we all expect to deliver our goods? And Professor Chang said our goods are our data. Why do we deliver our data freely to all these players and don't collect any taxes against it? So, in short, my answer is yes, there will remain globalization, but it will have a certain national flavor to it. Thank you.
I think 5 years from now, the environmental economy would have taken, in earnest, central stage. I think we would see an expansion, a massive expansion of the circular economy because of AI, machine learning. We would see new models of engagement. So we will see environmental innovation, and that would add a lot to the value chain. So I don't see that as all these measures as leading to a more expensive economy. The shift will be quite painful for many established groups around the world with vested interests. The other thing I see, which is very interesting, is I've been spending the last couple of years advising millennials. I'm humbled by their energy and their vision, the set of values, their views on risk and return, very different from what we are used to, and also the Gen Zs. And I see cross-generational divide, stronger than before, empowered more by social media. I don't forget, in some countries, social media is really the news feed and not the national newspaper. So you can forget about fake news or real news. The social media platform, that's the thing. And that is promising, but it will also have its negative consequences as well, as all this energy, this massive energy rushes out. And that's how I would predict the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. You mentioned about the next generation. Our students in the university, as well as a student from the basic education, they clearly mentioned that in the future, there won't be nation, there won't be companies, there won't be government, because everything will be transparent. So maybe we guys sitting here representing older generation, we're talking about our sweet dreams about the future, and then if we invite people from the really next generation, they will laugh about us, thinking that, hey, what are you guys talking about? In the future, everyone, because of the data, your own data, you represent yourself. There won't be companies, there won't be organizations. I'm just passing the message. It's a little bit stressful when I heard about this, but it's also very much inspiring to see that the next generation, combining with the technology, they are not afraid of what we already messed up. They have their own solution, and then their solution is cut it clear, and then they start from the scratch. That's only what I'm thinking and what I got from the university and the basic education. Maybe, Igor, you have something from the ABB experience.
First of all, I would like to remember the phrase that technology will drive globalization. Yes, I agree with this, but first of all, just partly, because I think the political power of big countries will make a big impact in globalization. Because we see today that, first of all, politics on place, and secondly, economy together with globalization. Of course, it will be connected very much with the big countries, and they have to play own role in the world. And if they decide that they need to develop some kind of national type of technology or do own products, I don't think that anything will stop them to do it. That is why for global companies like ABB, we have this in mind, and we are always in cooperation with governments. We understand that some local technical features or anything else is important for them, and we need to have a certain combination between globalization and nationalism, if you like. That we have to have in mind.
Professor Xiang, you have, yeah.
I'm not a technology expert, but I see this recent incident about Huawei got me really concerned. I did a lot of training for Ericsson in 1990s, Nokia, then many Alcatel, many, Motorola as well. And then Huawei was one of the 4 major telecom providers in China, one and only private company. Huawei was discriminated in China because it was private. We have 4 major companies: Ju, Da, Zhonghua, Giant, Datang, Huawei, and this Zhongxing. So one reason Huawei went global, partly because Huawei was private, did not get kind of deals they wanted, so sort of pushed out to market outside of China. And I still remember Cisco used to have 75% of China's internet infrastructure market. 75%. You see the dominance of Cisco, Oracle, Intel, IBM. Why China does not have a security concern? Give me a break, okay. I mean, maybe there's a security concern for Huawei products. I think the best way moving forward is more like international accounting standard. I'm accounting background, is it possible to have an international accounting standard on security issues for Huawei product, for Cisco product, for Intel product, for Ericsson product? That's the best way moving forward. Current way is definitely not a good way. I'm not a technology guy. I just want to propose some possible solution to all this kind of argument. You see the dominance American company in China. You can easily make an argument of potential security risk, American product in China as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The time is running up, so I have to quickly close up this session. First, thank you very much for joining here and contribute to this panel discussion. We're also very grateful all our panelists very generously giving their opinions and then their thoughts to this currently 4 paradoxical forces in the world. Really is something we should take home and think about it, talking with our children. Secondly, we also hope that in the next year and also coming year, we hope we have a free discussion, communication at this platform, this Identitat Global Forum collaborating with Caspian Week. So you are very welcome to send our email, calling us. Our information easily found on the www.igforum.org, where is a platform contributing to sustainability and intelligence. It's connecting to university, connecting to business school, connecting to the legal system, connecting to cross-continental organizations, government as well. So if you have any good thoughts, any good insight you want to express, you are very welcome to contact us. You can contact me directly. You can also contact Urs Lustenberger in Switzerland. Anyways, we hope to see you next year, either in Davos or in Zurich or in another corner of the world. I wish you a pleasant week here. Thank you.
Thank you.